The waitress says to the adeptomad, "Hello, sir. My mother has a tattoo exactly like yours." "What?" The musty smell of fried onions and weak coffee hung in the air of the pop diner, a scent as familiar and comforting to Emily as her worn-out shoes. It was a Tuesday afternoon, that lull between the lunch rush and the early evening crowd when the limelight seemed a little louder and the clink of cutlery almost annoying. Emily, 23, perpetually tired, was wiping down the sticky counter for the third time. Her thoughts wandered to the stack of shields waiting on the kitchen table. Her life was a monotonous cycle of taking orders, refilling lukewarm coffee, and enduring the occasional rude comment from the truck driver. She dreamed of something more, something beyond t-shirt crisps and an endless loop of classic rock on an ancient radio station. But for now, pop was her reality. The bell above the door rang, the sound that usually signaled a new customer. But this time, it was different. It was the heavy ringing of one person entering. There was a long, sharp, ringing sound, followed by a sudden, heavy silence that descended on the diner like a shroud. The few regular customers scattered among the various booths froze. Forks halfway to mouths, conversations dying on lips. Emily's hand, frozen, rested on the counter. The air outside had been filled a moment ago with a low, guttural hum, a sound that vibrated through the very foundations of the building, now abruptly cut off. Then they entered. Not one, not two, but a group of 6 men, filling the doorway with their impressive presence. Their leather vests, heavy with stripes and emblems, gleamed in the diner's relentless light. Long, unkempt hair, often hidden under a bandana, framed weathered faces lined with wrinkles that spoke of countless miles and a hard life. Beards, some braided, some wild, added to their menacing appearance. But it was their eyes that truly held the room captivated. Sharp, unblinking, assessing every angle of every person. The silence in the pop diner became absolute, thick with unspoken tension. They were unusual, tired travelers or local eccentrics. They were the adepts of hell. Emily had seen bikers before, of course, riding through town on their way to some rally, but never like this. Never a full contingent entering her quiet, modest diner. Her heart began to beat wildly against her ribs, a primal response to a sudden shift in the atmosphere. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Her years of training, serving all kinds of people, included professionalism. Here was the key. Treat them like any other customer, no matter how intimidating they are. The men moved with a slow, deliberate grace that belied their bulky figures. Their heavy, spiked boots clicked softly on the checkered linoleum floor as they made their way to the largest booth in the back, the one usually reserved for large families or the occasional poker game. They settled in, their skin creaking, their presence dominating the entire space. One man, clearly the leader, sat facing the entrance. His gaze swept across the diner once more, before finally landing on Emile. He was older than the others, his face a map of scars and sunburn. His eyes were a piercing blue that seemed to see right through her. A silver earring sparkled from his left ear. "The coffee is black," the leader muttered. His voice was surprisingly deep, but not loud, cutting through the silence like a knife. The other men made similar orders. More black coffee, a couple of waters. Nobody asked for a menu, they just waited. Their posture was relaxed yet tense, like predators at rest. Emily nodded. Her voice was a little shaky when she managed to answer. "Right away, sir." She turned and retreated to the safety of the counter. Her hands shook slightly as she poured the coffee. Her mind was racing. What did they want? They were just passing by. It was some kind of stop. She tried to look calm. Her movements were deliberate as she filled the mugs. The aroma of cheap coffee, like a snack bar, suddenly smelled even more ordinary against the backdrop of their powerful presence. She returned to their booth, her nose laden with steaming mugs. Her palms were sweating. She placed each cup down carefully, trying not to make eye contact, focusing instead on the task at hand. As she approached the leader, placing his black coffee in front of him, her gaze fell involuntarily on his hand. His left forearm was exposed. The sleeve of his leather vest was pulled back, revealing a canvas of intricate tattoos. Her eyes scanned the various designs: a snarling wolf, a tribal stripe, faded eagle. But then her gaze caught on one particular image protruding from the inside of his forearm. It was a skull. Not just any skull, but a very specific one. It was a winged skull, sharp and ominous, with a helmet on its head and a pair of outstretched wings extending from its temples. The details were incredibly precise. The shading is deep and dark, giving it a three-dimensional quality that made it appear to pop out of his skin. This was not the official Death's Head Hell Adept patch. Not quite, but it was a variation, a style, an aesthetic that was undeniably linked to the club's iconography, a symbol of freedom and defiance. It was a design she knew intimately. A sudden, unexpected jolt passed through her. A flash of recognition so powerful that it bypassed her carefully constructed wall of professionalism and fear. Her brain, still reeling from the shock of their arrival, processed the image with an almost childlike innocence, associating it with something deeply personal, something completely out of place in this terrifying scenario. The words, "unbidden and unfiltered," spilling out of her mouth before she could even comprehend the inappropriateness, the sheer audacity of them. Her voice, though still a little breathless, rang out clearly in the eerie silence of the diner. She looked up. Her eyes met the piercing blue gaze of the leader. A small, genuine smile flickered on her lips, born of pure, mindless wonder. "Hello, sir," she said. Her tone was surprisingly casual, almost friendly. "My mother has a tattoo exactly like yours." The words hung in the air, echoing in the sudden, absolute stillness that followed. The leader's face, which had been impassive, hardened slightly. His eyes narrowed, and the slight, almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders increased. The remaining bikers, who had been quietly sipping their coffee or looking around the room, now stopped. Their heads slowly turned towards Emily. Their expressions were unintelligible, a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and something much more dangerous. The clink of spoons from a distant booth, where an elderly man was too engrossed in his pie to notice the new arrivals, suddenly seemed deafening. The old man, finally sensing the shift, looked up. His eyes widened when he saw the scene. Emily felt a cold fear begin to seep into her veins, quickly replacing her fleeting surge of innocent recognition. The leader's gaze was no longer simply appraising. It was an intense, unshakable gaze that made her feel transparent, open. The small, friendly smile on her face faded, replaced by growing horror. What did she just say? The words repeated themselves in her mind, stripped of their innocent context, now sounding incredibly stupid, even provocative. She spoke to the hell worshipper, a man whose very presence demanded fear. and made a comment about his very distinctive tattoo, linking it to her mother. The sheer absurdity, the potential seriousness of her statement, began to dissipate before her with sickening clarity. The leader remained completely motionless. His eyes are locked on hers. He didn't speak, he didn't move, he just looked. A silent question, a silent challenge in his gaze. The air around their table seemed to thicken, becoming heavy with unspoken innuendo. The rest of the bikers watched. Their faces are gloomy, some with slight, anxious smiles playing on their lips. Emily's heart was pounding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and regret. She wanted to take back her words, to apologize, to disappear, but her feet seemed rooted in place. Her tongue suddenly feels heavy and useless in her mouth. She could feel the gazes of the other patrons, the weight of their silent judgment, their shared anxiety. The old man with the pie stopped chewing. His fork hung in the air, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. The leader slowly, deliberately raised his coffee cup to his lips, but his eyes never left hers. He took a long, slow sip. The action dragged on, punctuated by a theatrical pause that stretched the tension to breaking point. The silence was excruciating, broken only by the distant hum of refrigerators and the frantic pounding of Emily's own blood in her ears. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her temple, cold against her skin. She made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake, but the full extent of its consequences remained terrifyingly unclear. What did such a statement mean to people like these? What did this mean? And more importantly, what would their reaction be? Her mind raced, desperately trying to think of an explanation, a way to diffuse the situation, but the words wouldn't come. She was trapped, caught in the leader's unloving gaze. Her innocent comment opened the door to an unknown and potentially dangerous confrontation. The leader finally lowered his cup. The soft click of Oludzi's ceramics sounded unnaturally loud in the deep silence. His piercing blue eyes, however, never strayed from Emily. The slow sip was a deliberate act, a calculated pause meant to enhance the weight of her words, to let them marinate in the thick air of the diner. Now his gaze was no longer simply appraising. It was probing, cutting, as if trying to peel back the layers of her skin to find the truth underneath. A muscle twitched almost imperceptibly in his jaw, the only external sign of its internal processing. "Exactly the same as mine," he muttered. His voice was a low, guttural whisper that somehow managed to fill the entire room. Every syllable is pronounced with chilling precision. It was not a question seeking information, but rather a challenge, an invitation to explain the inexplicable. His eyes glanced at his tattooed forearm, then back to Emily. A silent order for her to develop, to justify her bold statement. The rest of the bikers remained motionless. Their collective attention is now completely locked on the exchange. Their gloomy faces reflected a mixture of suspicion and cold foreboding. Some leaned forward slightly. Their skin creaked and their posture shifted from relaxed to predatory. Emily's heart jumped into her throat. A mad bird trapped in a cage. The cold fear that had begun to seep into her veins now gushed forth. A wave of horror washed over her. She swallowed with difficulty. Her mouth was suddenly as dry as desert sand. Her earlier surge of recognition seemed like a lifetime ago, replaced by the crushing realization of her mistake. She had crossed an invisible line, stumbled into dangerous territory where casual remarks carried unforeseen weight. She desperately searched for words, for something to explain, to relieve the palpable tension that had transformed Pop's diner from a mundane place into a potential arena. "Yes, sir," she finally said. Her voice is barely audible, a sharp contrast to her earlier, surprisingly casual tone. She clasped her hands together, a nervous habit trying to stabilize them in order to appear calm. But her fingers were apparently shaking. The winged skull on her forearm is very similar, almost identical. In fact, she received it a long time ago. The words seemed inadequate, empty, even to her own ears. How could she explain such a profound coincidence without sounding completely stupid, or worse, deliberately provocative? The leader's gaze intensified, his eyes narrowing even further. A silent storm raging behind them. A low growl came from one of the other bikers, a young man with a shaved head and a prominent scar running across his left eyebrow. He shifted in his seat. His hand moved almost instinctively towards something hidden under his vest. The subtle movement sent a fresh jolt of fear through Emily. She instinctively took a small step back. Her eyes darted between the leader and the threatening biker. The rest of the patrons in the diner were now frozen. Their expressions were a mixture of fear and fascinated horror. Their attention was drawn to the unfolding drama. The old man with the pie dropped his fork. The ringing echoed like a shot. "A long time ago, you say?" the leader repeated. His voice is still low, but now laced with an edge of quiet menace. "And where exactly did your mother get such a specific piece of art? Because this isn't just a random design, girl. This is significant." He leaned forward slightly. His forearms rested on the table, bringing his face closer to hers. His blue eyes bored into her with alarming intensity. The silver earrings sparkled with luminescent lights, cold, hard shine. Emily felt a desperate urge to run. She fled from this stifling atmosphere, but her feet remained rooted. She knew she had to explain, to somehow bridge the terrible gap her innocent words had created. She never talked about it much. "Sir?" Emily stuttered. Her mind raced, trying to remember snippets of conversations from her childhood, vague memories of stories her mother had told her. "But I remember her saying that it was from her younger days when she was different. Before she settled in, she paused for the right words, a way to take it all in. She had a friend, a group of friends at the time. They were free spirits, as she called them, and they rode motorcycles." The leader's expression remained unreadable, but the slight tightening around his eyes suggested he was far from convinced. He exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance with the young biker, who now had his hand openly resting on the hilt of the knife tucked into his belt. The silent communication between them was chilling, a clear signal of escalating danger. "Rode motorcycles," the leader repeated. A small, ruthless smirk played on his lips. What did she call it? Free spirits? He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound that held no humor. "And that friend of hers, he also had a tattoo just like mine. Or perhaps it was your mother, who was more intimately involved in the culture." His words were a direct challenge, a thinly veiled accusation, implying a deeper, more personal connection than Emily had initially led on. The casual way he said the word culture was laden with unspoken meaning. Emily felt the color rise on her neck. Her mother, a quiet, unassuming woman who now worked as a librarian, had always been in some ways a mystery to her, a past she rarely spoke of. Emily knew her mother had lived a wilder life before she was born, but the details were always blurry, shrouded in a protective silence. Now that silence threatened to consume Emily in a very real, very dangerous way. I don't know, sir, Emily admitted. Her voice was filled with growing desperation. She'd only shown me hers. She said it was a symbol of something she believed in, freedom, loyalty. The leader's eyes narrowed even further. Freedom and loyalty, he repeated slowly, savoring the words. His gaze was unrelenting, very convenient. And what was your mother's name, girl? The question was sharp, interrupting Emily's hesitant explanation, demanding specific information that turned out to be the key to opening the hidden vault. Emily hesitated. Giving her mother's name seemed like another irreversible step, another line crossed, but refusing to answer seemed even more dangerous. She was caught between a rock and a hard place. Her innocent comment had turned into a nightmare. Eleanor, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. Eleanor Veens. The leader stared into her eyes for a long moment, processing the name. Then he slowly turned his head. His gaze slid over the other bikers at the table. He didn't speak, but a silent message passed between them. A shared recognition, a flicker of something in their hardened eyes that Emily couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't quite surprise, more like a grim confirmation, a memory awakening from the depths of their collective past. The air grew even heavier, thick with unspoken history. Eleanor Veens, one of the older bikers, a man with a long, drooping beard and a missing front tooth, finally spoke. His voice was a low growl. He looked at the leader, then back at Emile. His eyes expressed a strange mixture of curiosity and something akin to respect, but still heavily tinged with suspicion. That name, it tells me something. The boss leader, whose face was a mask of indifference, now showed a flicker of something. A shadow passed across his eyes. He returned his attention to Emily. His gaze was even more intense now, less overtly hostile, but infinitely more unsettling. It was the look of a man who had just found the missing piece of a very old, very complex puzzle. "So, your mother is Eleanor Vance," the leader declared. Not a question, but a statement. He leaned back in the booth, a subtle shift in posture that paradoxically made him even more imposing. He took another slow sip of coffee. His eyes never left Emily's face. "And she has a tattoo of a winged skull on her forearm. Just like this one." He gestured to his arm with his chin. "Tell me, Emily, her skull also has a small, almost imperceptible gap on the upper right wing near the tip." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The specificity of the question was stunning. She hadn't noticed such a detail on the tattoo. Leader, but she knew with absolute certainty that the tattoo on her was flawed. It was a crushing, nearly invisible imperfection that her mother always joked about, claiming the artist sneezed at the crucial moment. It was a detail so minute, so personal, that only someone who had seen the tattoo up close, or perhaps even been present when it was applied, would know about it. A cold chill ran down her spine, not just from fear, but from the sudden, profound realization that her mother's past was far more intertwined with these dangerous men than she had ever imagined. The leader wasn't just probing. He was testing, confirming, connecting dots Emily hadn't even known existed. The silence in the diner stretched, thick now, not just with tension, but with the weight of history about to collide with the present, Emily felt a deep sense of helplessness, caught in a game she didn't understand. Her mother's secrets suddenly threatened to consume her. She could only watch, her lips slightly parted, unable to form a response. The leader's piercing blue eyes held her captive in a silent, terrifying interrogation. The fate of her immediate future, and perhaps even her life, suddenly depended on the answer to a question she was now too afraid to ask. A question about a small, faded gap in the tattoo that had just connected decades and worlds. The other bikers watched, their faces grim, their hands no longer idly at hand but subtly positioned, ready for whatever revelation was about to unfold. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed to grow louder, a high-pitched squeal accompanying the frantic beating of her heart. Emily could feel the collective gaze of the diner's patrons, a suffocating pressure of silent panic and morbid curiosity. The air, once musty with the smell of fried onions, now tasted metallic, the taste of fear. She knew without a shadow of a doubt that her answer would either condemn her or perhaps mercifully offer a grain of understanding, though she wasn't sure which outcome was preferable. The secret of her mother's past was coming into her diner in the form of 6 terrifying men, and Emily was caught right in its ruthless path. "Yes," Emily whispered. The word was barely a breath, but it carried a chilling clarity through the absolute silence of the diner. Her voice trembled, a fragile thread in the heavy air. "Yes, sir, that's right. A small chip on the upper right wing. My mother always said the artist sneezed." The leader's piercing blue eyes, which had been fixed on hers with an almost predatory intensity, softened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something like recognition, or perhaps a deep, buried memory, crossed his pitted face. The grim set of his jaw relaxed a little, and for the first time since their arrival, the palpable tension in his posture seemed to dissipate, replaced by a deep, almost melancholy weariness. The other bikers, who had been tensed like coiled springs, visibly relaxed. The young man with the scar removed his hand from the hilt of his knife, though his gaze remained sharp, alert. The leader let out a slow, deliberate sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. He leaned back into the booth. The leather creaked softly. His gaze was distant now, as if looking through Emily into a past only he could see. "Eleanor Vance," he murmured. The name was a ghost on his lips, so she finally settled. A waitress as a daughter. Life is funny." So he took another sip of coffee, but this time the action was devoid of threat. The simple act of a man lost in thought. She's a librarian now, sir," Emily managed. Her voice still trembled, but a grain of hope, a fragile sense of understanding began to break through her terror. The leader laughed, a low, humming sound that was surprisingly warm, tinged with a hint of irony. Librarian from wildcat to librarian. That's typical of Eleanor, always full of surprises. He finally lowered his cup, placing it carefully on the saucer. His eyes, less intimidating now, met Emily's eyes. "My name is Frank. Most people call me boss or chief, but to Eleanor she always called me Mage. Mage." The name echoed faintly in Emily's memory, the name her mother sometimes muttered in her sleep or in a rare moment of nostalgic reverie, always accompanied by a wistful sigh. The pieces began to come together, forming a picture far more complex and personal than she could ever have imagined. "Eleanor and I have known each other for a long time," the mage began. His voice took a narrative tone, a narrator retelling a long-lost chapter. The other bikers remained silent. Their attention was rapt. Some nodded slowly, others simply listened. Their hardened faces reflected a shared story. That tattoo. It wasn't just a design. It was a mark, a symbol of a pack, of a promise. In the early days, when this club was just a bunch of restless souls looking for something more than the straight and narrow, Eleanor, she wasn't a member. Not officially. We didn't have club women in the sense that some do now. But she was more than that. She was family. She was us. He paused. His gaze drifted to the window, as if watching ghosts of the past ride down the highway. She was a force, your mother, fierce, independent, with a spirit that could outrun any of us. She bandaged our wounds when we were beaten, fed us when we were broke, and she never asked for nothing in return. She believed in what we stood for: freedom, loyalty, brotherhood. And this tattoo, it was her way of showing it. We all got a variation of it, a personal symbol of our commitment to each other, to this life. Mine is a little different, a little older, but the essence is the same: a winged skull. It meant that we were connected in spirit to something greater than ourselves, and the gap was her own little rebellion against perfection, her way of saying that she was unique, even among our ranks. Emily listened, mesmerized. A wave of emotion washed over her. A deep sense of shock, of course, but also a strange pride and a nascent understanding of the woman who raised her. Her quiet, bookish mother, a librarian smelling of old paper and bergamot tea, had once traveled with these men, been part of their dangerous, exciting world. Untold stories, quiet silences, wistful the glances her mother sometimes cast at passing motorcycles. It all made terribly beautiful sense. She was a good woman now, Eleanor. An older biker with a missing tooth appeared. His voice was softer than before. She saved my life once from a nasty fall on old Route 17, bandaged my wounds with nothing more than a first aid kit and a bottle of whiskey, tough as nails. A wave of murmurings and nods passed through the group. Each man seemed to recall his own memory of Eleanor Vance, the wildcat who had touched their lives. The atmosphere in Pop's diner was completely transformed. The stifling tension evaporated, replaced by a warm, almost familial camaraderie. The other patrons who had been holding their breath now began to stir. A collective sigh of relief echoed softly through the room. The old man with the pie lifted his fork, though his eyes remained fixed on the bikers. A new blend awe and wonder in their depths. The magician looked back at Emily. A faint, genuine smile graced his lips. So, daughter of Eleanor Vance, you have her eyes, girl. That same fire. He paused, then reached into the inside pocket of his leather vest. Emily's heart fluttered nervously, but the gesture was slow, deliberate, devoid of threat. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, thick and heavy. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table. Coffee is on me, Emily. And for old time's sake, save the change for your mother. Tell her Max said hi. And tell her I still remember how she could adjust the carburetor with a hairpin. Emily stared at the money, then at Mac. The enormity of the gesture, the unexpected kindness, the sudden, profound connection to her mother's hidden past, overwhelmed her. Tears pricked her eyes. "Thank you, sir," she said. Her voice was thick with emotion. "I'll tell her." The mage rose from the booth. His movement was still deliberate, but now imbued with a sense of purpose, not threat. The other bikers followed suit. Their heavy boots softly thumped on the linoleum once more. But this time, the sound was comforting, not terrifying. As they exited, each offered Emily a nod, a silent acknowledgement of a shared moment, an unexpected bridge built between their worlds. The young man with the scar even offered a faint, almost shy smile. The bell above the door rang again, a long, sharp ring. As the last biker exited, he was followed by the familiar low rumble of powerful motorcycle engines starting outside. The sound vibrated through the diner, no longer a harbinger of dread, but a fading echo of an open past. Then, as suddenly as they arrived, they were gone, leaving behind only the smell of leather and exhaust, and a deep, life-altering silence. Emily stood there, transfixed, a $100 bill clutched in her shaking hand. Her mind swirled, trying to process the encounter. A revelation. Her mother, Leonore Vance, the quiet librarian. The woman who always seemed so ordinary, so predictable, had once lived a life of wild freedom, riding alongside these men. A vital part of their formidable world. The tattoo, once a mysterious, intriguing mark, was now a vivid symbol of a past she never knew, a secret history that had just entered her diner and revealed itself. She looked down at the counter, at the sticky residue of spilled coffee, at her worn uniform, at the stack of bills still waiting on her kitchen table. Her life at Pop's diner, once a monotonous cycle of orders and refills, now seemed imbued with a new depth, a hidden layer of possibility. She still dreamed of something more than an appetizer and an endless classic horn. But now that dream seemed less like an escape and more like an exploration. She had a mother to talk to, a past to uncover, stories that finally needed to be heard. The musty smell of fried onions and wheat coffee still clung to the air, but it no longer seemed so stale, so ordinary. Emily glanced at her reflection in the darkened window, seeing not just a tired waitress, but a woman standing on the edge of newfound understanding. A woman whose world had just expanded in the most unexpected and extraordinary way. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed to sing a little louder. No more crying, but quiet, hopeful, a melody signaling the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where the whispers of the past finally found their voice, and the ordinary opened her extraordinary heart. She picked up the $100 bill, a tangible link to a world she was only just beginning to understand, and a quiet, determined smile finally blossomed on her face. The stacks of bills on her kitchen table still waited, but now Emily felt like she had a whole new story to tell and new strength to face whatever came next.